Now, once you have those paragraphs, those individual points you want to make, we also need to think about what order those body paragraphs come in. You have many options, and of course, for things, some of these apply better than others to a rhetorical analysis, but here are some big options for how to order your body paragraphs. First is thinking about organizing them chronologically. And in the case of a text, chronologically means in the order a reader reads the analyzed text. So you could start at the beginning of your text, walk through it bit by bit, and then bring us to the end so that the structure of your rhetorical analysis mirrors the structure of the text itself. You could also organize it spatially. For just a written text, this is a little bit less relevant. For a visual text, or one that includes both visuals and written text, this might work a little bit better. Spatial is in the order the eye interacts with the text. So what do you see first? Do your eyes first go to that image and then to the title? The ways in which the piece is laid out can be a way to organize a rhetorical analysis. You could also organize it by the appeals themselves. And that could mean starting with the strongest and most relevant. So for instance, if you were saying a text is effective, you might start with what you see as the most relevant rhetorical appeal to its effectiveness. It is effective mainly because it relies on this appeal. Then you can move through it and look in the order of most to least. So we start out with where they're strongest and then get down to the things that are either problems or just don't occur that much. And the opposite could be true. Particularly if you were saying that a text is not effective, then you might start by saying, here's the one where they are the weakest. Or maybe you're saying that they're very effective, but there's one part of it they don't do well. Well, you might address the part that's weak first before making your case for why it's strong. There's no right or wrong as far as organization goes, as long as there is a consistent organization and the organization makes sense for the topic at hand. So it will vary. That's why there's no hard and fast rule. But know that you want to be avoiding repetition. We don't want to have to say over and over again, as I said above. And when we have to repeat ourselves, that is often a sign that the organization is not working in the essay's favor. We also want to make sure that related paragraphs are placed near each other. So for instance, I probably wouldn't do pathos, 2 paragraphs in a row of pathos, then talk about ethos, and then go back to pathos. Perhaps that would make sense depending on the text, but in most cases, you'd want to address one entire rhetorical appeal before you moved on to the next one. That just means that readers don't have to jump around as much in their thoughts, which means they can stay more engaged. Finally, let's talk about the conclusion. Sometimes this can be the hardest of the 5-paragraph essay rules to unlearn. We are used to writing conclusions, you are used to writing conclusions that are summary. That does not work starting now. We are not interested in writing paragraphs that are a waste of your time in writing them and a waste of our time in reading them. And a paragraph that only tells us things you've already told us is a waste of both our times. Instead, we want to think about the conclusion as bringing us back to a larger context. In this way, you can think of it as similar to that plane landing. We've been one little plane up there in the air, but now we're coming back to Earth, and we're going to get off the plane and we're going to go out into the world. So we need to think about the world now, not just that one little plane. So we're coming to a larger context. For a rhetorical analysis, that typically means answering one or more of these questions. If I were you, I would think of the answers to these and write them down and then use those notes as my conclusion. Why does your analysis matter? What is the point of analyzing this text? What can we learn about the rhetorical tools and appeals from your analysis? Now that you've looked very closely to how those rhetorical tools and appeals were used within the essay, within the text, now let's step back and say, okay, what can that tell us about the tools themselves? What can that tell us about pathos as a whole, not just in this one text? Or what can we learn about addressing the communicator's intended audience from your analysis? Maybe the way the communicator used logos tells us something about how that audience might respond to logos, or what kind of logos works best with them. Again, we're moving from thinking about this one text that we've been analyzing really closely, and we're zooming out to consider a larger context, a larger conversation about rhetoric and its appeals. This conclusion is actually from an essay that a student wrote in this very English 1101 class. It was a little bit different of a structure, but in a previous 1101 class, in my class a few years ago. I found this conclusion really strong, so I asked the student if I could use it as an example. So here it is. I'll read it, and then we'll talk about why it's strong. Oh, by the way, this is a rhetorical analysis of Macklemore's music video, Same Love. At the time of this video, Macklemore was tackling a controversial topic. Inspiring millennials to participate in support of same-sex marriage could have been a difficult challenge, but by focusing on the issue rather than himself, he was able to touch his audience emotionally and convince them logically. When hoping to inspire action from an audience, especially an audience of millennials, these appeals are the most important. Millennials are at an age where much of their decision-making is determined by their emotions. So it is crucial to make them feel passionate about a topic. But because millennials have also grown up with constant media access, they are also critical thinkers who are unlikely to physically act on an issue unless it makes sense with their worldview. Combining appeals to pathos with logos is an effective strategy for inspiring this particular audience to act. So note that the first few sentences of this reiterate, not repeat, but reiterate what would have been a thesis. In other words, it doesn't say Macklemore effectively convinced them, blah, 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 but it tells us that that's how the person sees it. So we're brought back to that larger claim about the text. And then we move past it pretty quickly. Most of this conclusion is focused on what we have learned then about addressing the audience of millennials and how these different appeals could be used for that audience. So in that case, starting with when hoping to inspire action, none of the rest of it talks just about this one text. It zooms out, it focuses on the larger context, which is not just these appeals in this one text, but is these appeals overall in life, in any text, with this audience. So we move out to a larger context based on what we've learned from the analysis itself. I hope this look at the different parts of a rhetorical analysis has been helpful in understanding what it is and what it does. But as always, if you have questions, please let me know. I look forward to working with you more as we dive into these rhetorical analyses. Bye.